So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be joining us today. Thank you all very much for joining this very exciting experts panel session in the COP30 Climate Law and Governance Day. We will have a really wonderful panel discussing the topic, enabling climate and nature finance for resilient futures, from law to leverage. My name is Pedro Schilling, and I'm Assistant Professor of Financial and Environmental Law at the UCL Faculty of Laws. And it's my absolute pleasure to serve as chair of today's session. To give you a sense of the important themes we will be discussing today, we know that across emerging and developing economies, the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are converging into a systemic challenge for sustainable developments. And while global finance has expanded, nature finance remains very critically underdeveloped. Yet, nature-based solutions could deliver over 1/3 of the emission reductions needed by 2030, while also enhancing resilience, livelihoods, and long-term economic stability. To contribute to this discussion, we really couldn't have asked for a better panel of experts, which don't only have a really impressive grasp of the challenges in the area, but are also in the front lines of developing truly innovative solutions in the climate and nature finance space. So to introduce you to our wonderful panelists, we have Vesselina Haralampieva, who is the head of Sustainable Finance Governance and Regulation at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She's directly responsible for designing some of the most interesting and innovative approaches in climate finance in areas like transition plans. We're very glad to have her with us, and for all the organization her and Chris did in putting this session together. We have Christina, who is Principal Counsel and Team Leader at the Law and Policy Reform Unit at the Asian Development Bank. I think it's very fair to say that she leads one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive, law and regulatory reform portfolios out of any international organization. We have Caio Oliveira, who is head of the Sustainable Finance and Corporate Governance team at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. He's directly responsible for developing and disseminating really crucial best practices that are really helping countries to move in the right direction. We have Phoebe, who is a legal officer at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. She's really doing truly outstanding contributions to advancing what is potentially one of the most crucial areas for emissions reductions and involved in delivering really crucial technical assistance. And last but not least, we have Fabiano de Andrade Correa, who is Senior Counsel at the International and Environmental Law Practice of the World Bank Group. Fabiano has a very impressive portfolio dealing with a range of climate-related matters, with carbon markets, and supporting the many trust funds that are crucial for project implementation. The way this is going to work is that we're going to have 2 rounds of questions, and then, time permitting, some time for questions and answers. So please, those of you in the audience, do send your questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, or to our incredible moderator, Christian, who we thank for taking the time in helping us today. So with that, we can kick right off to our first round of questions, and we can maybe start with Vessi. Vessi, the EBRD has been playing a very leading role in advancing the green and governance agenda across its regions. So could you tell us a little bit more about how the bank is helping clients to strengthen their green transition? And what specifically do you see the role that policy and legal reforms can play in enabling private investment to scale up those efforts?
Thank you, Pedro. Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and join this esteemed panel on these very, very relevant topics to us, to our societies, I think to the planet as a whole. So I wanted to share that many of us, including some of our audience members, we all friends, colleagues, we all united by our shared commitment to help emerging markets accelerate their green transition and really close the financing gap and create more opportunities. At EBRD, we provide capital for projects that drive sustainable growth. We complement investment with technical assistance and policy dialogue. really because financing alone cannot deliver the scale of transformation that is needed. We've heard, and we will hear in the following panel more about the funding that is needed, the budget that is needed for the transformation in the emerging markets. And we have aligned all our activities with the Paris Agreement, which means that every investment of the bank is assessed for consistency with low carbon pathways and resilience objectives. So that's really a fundamental shift in how we approach development and climate finance, and this is in operation since 1st of January 2023. To scale climate action, we focus on mobilizing private capital. Our legal and policy teams design innovative structures, solutions such as blended finance and risk-sharing facilities that really focus on reducing risks and making climate and nature-related projects bankable. In many of our countries' operations, as many of us we know, we have experienced the regulatory uncertainty, overlapping institutional mandates, or limited enforcement, and other issues that continue to hold back private investment and private mobilization. So without predictable, transparent frameworks, capital simply won't flow. And that's why we very much focus on this trio kind of policy dialogue, legal reform, investment, and also very much as part of our policy dialogue, we work on institutional strengthening. A central element of this approach, I want to give you more like kind of a scale from starting at the country level, really going down in our approaches to a client-specific products that we have developed and implementing. So the one at the country level, it's very much a product that brings together governments, development partners, and the private sector under these shared climate transition goals. And these platforms go beyond individual transactions. They focus on reform at the sectoral, at the national level. They provide technical assistance when it's needed and mobilize private sector investment in addition to concessional finance within a single coherent framework. So we see this model in action in Egypt, as so-called the nexus of water, food, and energy. EBRD is very proud of it, but we work together with sister institutions as well. And here we really focus on supporting the government in designing a decommissioning master plan and a just transition scoping study. So we want to underline that this is really this type of country-level platforms turn country-level ambition and development partners support into implementation. So creating the conditions for sustained investment, just transition, and long-term impact. Another level is sector-level reform. So this is another cornerstone of our work. There we work with governments to modernize energy laws, to streamline licensing, permitting, to strengthen institutions, really to enable open and competitive energy markets. A good example of a similar project, which we developed a couple of years ago, is the development of the first offshore wind policy and law in Greece, which established a comprehensive legal and institutional framework for offshore wind development and for investor participation. Private sector mobilization, as I mentioned, is key to our mandate. Other sector-specific support or legislative reform we have done, I can give you an example in Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, helping them to amend their energy and gas laws, to strengthen their energy regulators, transposing European directives very much with the aspirations to embed transparency, predictability into market rules, and to create open and credible frameworks for investors. In parallel with this country and sector level projects, we work in the financial systems. So we focus on greening the financial systems because a transition will not succeed without the financial markets participants. An example here is a climate practices and transition planning program, which is focusing on supporting our partner financial institutions across a number of jurisdictions, starting from Central Asia, Caucasus, Turkey, Western Balkans, and Southern Mediterranean, to embed climate governance and disclosure standards in order to help them assess what are the climate risks, the climate opportunities, to really start greening their portfolio, and in this way unlock and create new green opportunities. And here the last example I want to mention is
Here, if you
the support
can
that we
try to
provide.
wrap up, Vessi, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Pedro. So it's zooming into the support for corporates. So here we have our pilot corporate climate governance facility, where we do a similar engagement with corporates to help them align their climate governance and their risk management, their strategies with low carbon and resilient pathways. So I'll finish here, hand over to you. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you very much. I've been instructed by the organization to be very authoritarian because we have so many great experts and a very packed agenda. So with that, we can just shift to the Asia Pacific and maybe hear a bit from Christina. Christina, can you tell us a little bit about how the ADB is working to strengthen legal and institutional frameworks that enable climate and nature positive investments and are generally helping us to shift towards more sustainable, resilient economic systems? Thank you again for being here.
Many thanks, Pedro, and many thanks for that generous introduction before. And thank you to all the organizers for this amazing Climate Law and Governance Day, and also to EBRD, Vessi, and Chris. So just something quick about ADB for those of you who aren't familiar. We're a regional bank owned by 69 shareholders, but most our real clients are really the 50 developing member countries in the Asia Pacific region. And we also have we've also mainstreamed the green transition as part of our mandate, and we also have similar instruments. So, when we zoom out and think about how countries can make the green transition possible, it's about systematic transformation and scaling investment and finance. And the law has a critical role to play. And I can, echo what Vessi has says. I mean, whether it's a green investment or otherwise, there needs to be a predictable and robust business environment to track the green investments and finance. So first, at the fundamental level, at the ADB, we've been assisting our developing member countries to modernize, for example, secure transactions, insolvency, alternative resolution, and PPP laws based on international instruments already out there. And I would say that sort of like goes to the scale, because I think it is good to leverage the model instruments, also standards, including by OECD, that are out there to help strengthen the business climate. We also work with judges, because they are really at the heart of all the different types of disputes that are emanating from the climate and nature related investments. I guess one example is that fundamental business reforms are material, risk to investors, because we had a case where we had a foreign lender that wanted to invest in a renewable energy project in one of our client countries, but then the country didn't, sign on to the New York Convention. So it basically, they didn't want to come in. And then basically the country requested our assistance to enact international commercial arbitration reform, which helped foreign lenders come on board. Second, and I'd like to focus on this more, is basically we've been working with our client countries, as well as others in the investment policy ecosystem, to green the FDI legal framework, which is an interconnected system of international law and domestic laws. It is quite complex in terms of all the web of different commitments that countries have signed on to domestically, internationally. And then also there's issues with coherence horizontally and institutional, vertically, which I will get into. But basically, it's been challenging for countries to manage what this looks like on a practical level. They have to do this FDI balancing test, balancing, the foreign investors' requirements for stability, predictability, and transparency, and then, their domestic policymaking towards the green transition, and it's really tough. So, and on top of that, there's a lot of ongoing reforms in the investment policy landscape that they really need to keep up to date. So, to help our developing member countries sort of tackle this challenge, we launched the Technical Assistance Program to strengthen their knowledge about FDI legal framework and how that can be, leveraged to make the green transition. And we've been focusing on working with government officials about, for example, what international investment agreements are, because it's a very specialized regime, and it is a primary instrument governing FDI, and how they can, basically how they maneuver um, in terms of their domestic policy making with all these different commitments in place. So our capacity building program includes building awareness of international commitments, state attribution, appreciating the consequences of their decision, and knowing the circumstances implicating investment treaties, for example, and identifying the range of policy options that's available to them without, basically violating any of their international commitments. And on this, we basically study very closely the various investor-state disputes, especially in the energy transition. For example, banning fossil fuels with exploration, coal phase out, critical minerals mining projects, to draw out lessons on how governments can facilitate an orderly green transition and, of course, prevent investor-state disputes. These cases are very fact-specific, but there are some important lessons, such as, acting fairly, reasonably, and proportionally. And these are the fundamental tenets of good governance. And also, we advise governments in developing new model bilateral investment treaties to promote sustainable development and to promote actually more of a balanced framework. And we also develop toolkits to aid governments toward coherent policy approaches. In fact, we're doing a training soon at the end of this month in Uzbekistan with all ministries across the government to see how they could.
And here, Christina, if you can also go towards wrapping up. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's sort of like the core. But then I guess lastly, I also echo Vessi's thing about supporting sectoral reforms. But just on that, sectoral transformations also need an integrated approach with other related laws and government ministries and agencies. Many thanks. Thanks, Pedro.
Thank you very much. And hopefully that shows to all the attendees how busy really our panelists have been in doing amazing, amazing things, and really helpful to see how different systems are all connected to tackle the issues we're discussing. OECD has been mentioned, so it feels like a very good moment to turn to Caio. Thank you very much for being here today, Caio. What insights have emerged from OECD standards and research on the integration of climate and biodiversity considerations into a reporting framework? So, a theme where you're really been breaking grounds for at the international level.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the question, and also for the previous speakers for their very insightful comments. At the OECD, we do both research and also we set standards to policymakers and regulators. In my case, in the case of my team, we serve especially security regulators and central banks. So just to give you the background of what we are covering here. So in terms of recommendations related to disclosure systems, I think that there are two key policies that make disclosure, sustainability-related disclosure better. One of them is the adherence to international standards that facilitates the comparison of information provided by different companies. And the second key policy or practice is the provision of assurance by a third party that checks the quality of the information that was provided to the markets. So in terms of the standards, the quality of those standards, the recommendation that we have in the principles of corporate governance, which are G20, OECD legal instruments and set of recommendations, there are the principles clearly recommend for jurisdictions to adhere to an international standard of high quality. So they can be the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, IFRS S1, S2, but I mean, very specifically, we would not recommend the countries, jurisdictions to create their own national standards. So this is very clear. And when we look at the recent developments in terms of the adoption of different standards, we see that only 2 years ago, we only had less than 20% of jurisdictions that we cover, 52 jurisdictions, G20, OECD, FSB members. So among them, less than 20% used to adhere to international standards, but now we have more than 70%. So it was a very clear development in line with our recommendation. And I mean, just very quickly, just to share with you, 46% of those jurisdictions, they adhere to the European Sustainability Standards, 17% do IFRS S1, S2, And in also 17% they have their own local standards. And in terms of the adoption by companies, whether because of regulation or voluntarily, we see that actually the GI standards are the most often used because they are the oldest one as well. And companies, I think that usually they appreciate the level of detail of the GI standards. So we have companies representing 61% of global market capitalization using the GI standards. And we also have a significant number of companies still using the SASB standards, which will naturally be replaced by IFRS S1, S2. So just my last point in relation to what may be going forward in terms of the adoption of standards, we see a very clear convergence around the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are about to be revised because of a decision of the European Parliament, and also around the IFRS S1, S2, which are only used by less than 1,000 companies today. But because of the adoption by very large economies of these standards as mandatory ones, we will see in the next few years probably a very much higher level of adoption by companies. And now moving to assurance, we have a very clear recommendation, which was ambitious, I think, after the revision of the principles 2 years ago, which is to require assurance of sustainability-related disclosure, if not now, in the medium or long term. So the principles recommend a phasing of requirements of third-party assurance. And what we see today already, it was, I mean, we almost didn't have any country requiring assurance 2 years ago, but today we have 62% of the jurisdictions that we follow with either a recommendation or requirement of assurance, which is, I think, very good news. But we also see, which is also in line with our recommendation, some jurisdictions like Singapore or Spain to require assurance only in relation to specific metrics, such as greenhouse gas emissions. And just to finish my initial intervention, I mean, on the side of the companies, their practices, we see that companies, 42% of companies that disclose sustainability information, they also provide assurance, which, at least for me, before we made this calculation, was a bit surprising. I mean, it's a very high level of provision of assurance. And even in the US, in China, where there's no recommendation or requirement for assurance. So we can see that this really comes even from investor demands, and also not only because of regulatory action. So just to finish then, I think that's, and we have seen some changes in Europe, and we can discuss later if there's interest. But we see in the long term, I think the adoption with a phasing process of assurance requirements and a focus on key metrics.
Thank you very much, Caio, and I think we can't overstate how much the incorporation of the sustainability aspects on the new principles of corporate governance in 2023 has really made. So thank you for bringing some insights into that. Now turning to Phoebe, turning to the front lines of how we get things implemented. Could you share a little bit about how is IFAD bridging the finance and policy gap to turn climate and nature priorities for rural communities into more viable, investable opportunities through policy innovations? And thank you very much once again for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. My thanks to the Climate Law and Governance Initiative, the EBRD, and all the partners here today for these very important, fantastic discussions. Briefly on IFAD, for those that don't know, we're the only UN specialized agency and international food and financial institution that is solely focused on rural development. We're working every single day to end rural poverty by empowering small-scale farmers, strengthening food systems, and building community resilience. I want to frame today's remarks with optimism, because amid all of the challenges, there is real momentum. One recent development stands out, the COP30 Belém Declaration, which firmly places the right to food on the climate agenda and recognizes smallholders and rural communities as central to climate justice and resilience. So at this stage of my intervention, you may be thinking, what does agriculture have to do with climate and biodiversity finance? That's what I'm here for. So I'll keep this brief. 3 points really matter here. Agriculture is a major emitter, so climate finance must cover food systems. Secondly, those least responsible for climate change, including rural smallholders, are bearing some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And finally, climate shocks are driving hunger. They're driving hunger for around 673 million people. That sounds like a lot of people. What does that mean in reality? That's 200 million more people than the EU's entire population. So that's the scale, and that's why agriculture is relevant in this conversation. For poor rural communities, the climate crisis is existential. We have droughts, floods, and storms becoming more and more frequent. These are driving hunger, they're displacing families, and they're damaging supply chains. Smallholders are producing around 1/3 of the world's food. However, this is an important statistic. They're receiving less than 1% of global climate finance. A stark illustration of the gap we face and the gap that IFAD is trying to bridge. The broader picture is pretty striking too. Transitioning global agri-food systems onto a 1.5-degree pathway requires over $1 trillion annually. $1 trillion. Current climate finance to agriculture needs to increase 40-fold to fill the gap. I want to stress that the quantity of finance is important, but also the quality of finance is critical. Costly or overly restricted funding deepens, not reduces, vulnerability. We need to increase the quantity and the quality of climate finance to smallholders. So how is IFAD bridging the gap, to return to Pedro's question? Between 2022 and 2024, IFAD invested more than 1.2 billion in climate adaptation, using grants, loans, and other concessional financing tailored to the country's need. Over 90% of our projects build rural people's adaptive capacity, and these investments are not just about food. The investments create economic opportunity by safeguarding production. They support jobs and strengthen social and economic stability. We work with farmers' organizations to promote climate resilient practices, upgrade infrastructure, and create systems that can withstand the extreme weather events that we're experiencing, from early warning systems to disaster risk measures. So I also said I'd talk a bit about the policy gap. On the policy side, impact depends on strong institutions that can coordinate across sectors. IFAD's Reducing Agricultural Methane Programme, or RAMP, supported by the Global Methane Hub and the US State Department, shows this in practice. Methane is driving around 1/3 of global warming, much of it from agriculture. Through RAMP, IFAD helps 17 countries integrate methane reduction into national climate plans. This helps design sound and bankable projects for investment. The program is aiming to mobilize nearly $900 million and it will reach millions of smallholders, with its strength rooted in technical support, national ownership, and financial innovation. To wrap up, shifting agricultural systems towards low carbon, climate resilient, nature positive models delivers major climate gains. But unlocking the full mitigation and adaptation potential, it requires far greater, more targeted climate investment. Going back to that quantity and quality aspect, it's important that we continue to be optimistic and put in place the actions that are inspired by the COP30 Berlin Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, and really crucial points. I cannot overstate, I think, on the quantity and quality aspect, how important that has proven to be in practice. To finish up our first rounds, Fabiano, it's a really big pleasure to have you with us today. Very easy question, considering your broad portfolio, but could you tell us a little bit about how the World Bank is supporting policy and legal reforms that creates enabling environment for green and climate investments, and especially in trying to sort of bridge the gap or align national frameworks with global transition and resilience goals as well. So your big challenge will be to keep that to 5 minutes. And you might be on mute. I think you're muted on the software. It blinked a few times, but we'll see if headphones out work. Otherwise, we can jump to the second round and then come back, circle back to Fabiano when the time comes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh,
Thank
perfect. Technology, 2025 technology keeps playing tricks on us. I am so sorry, and I just missed one of my 5 minutes, but I'll do my best. In any case, Pedro, thank you very much for the introduction, and greetings everyone from Washington, DC. It's always a great pleasure to join Climate Law and Governance Day, and even more so in a panel like this with such great colleagues. I'm going to focus my response to this first question on the role of the World Bank on carbon markets and what we've been doing in this sphere, and trying to bring 3 main points. The World Bank has really been emphasizing the potential of carbon markets to bring additional debt-free finance to developing countries and to engage the private sector, which, as we know, is critical to really achieve the level of finance that is needed. And the legal department, I am part of the International and Environmental Law unit at the bank. We have been very much engaged in this endeavor from the outset, from over 20 years. So on the first point, I would highlight knowledge generation and diagnostic tools. The World Bank has launched a climate change action plan, which mandated the development of the so-called country climate and development reports, the CCDRs, which were designed to really provide a comprehensive picture at country level of how climate and development goals can go hand in hand. And in these CCDRs, we always emphasize the importance of including also an overview and an assessment of the country legal and enabling institutional frameworks for carbon market participation. This to give an idea of what the challenges are, what the main gaps are, but also on proposing very concrete measures to overcome these challenges. And the outcome of these CCDRs then inform everything from the country partnership frameworks that are really the framework of intervention of the bank in country, and also the development of subsequent interventions at country level. Then in terms of number 2, direct legislative support that we provide, this happens, for instance, in the context of development policy lending instruments that we signed that often have the support for carbon and climate legislation at country level as a prior action. And we engage at the legal department level to review and provide recommendations for legislation in this area. But we are also developing more specifically a carbon markets legal and regulatory reforms toolkit that we hope will be a very useful instrument in countries engaging in legal reforms in this area. And then number 3, the point that I really wanted to spend a bit more time on is our direct carbon market engagement. That happens first and foremost in the trust funds that we have that operate in the carbon market sphere and on which the bank acts as trustee. I myself, this is a very significant chunk of my time. I am the legal advisor of 2 of what we call our green funds, the Carbon Fund of the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, and the Biocarbon Fund of the Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes. These 2 trust funds were really innovative and piloted groundbreaking methodologies for nature-based solutions, carbon market interventions. And in each of these trust funds, we design and implement emission reduction purchase agreements with developing countries, which really have not only an economic and transactional aspect of buying carbon credits from countries, but really being a development partner of these countries in providing support and technical assistance and financing so that countries really experience how it is to generate credits out of forestry and agriculture, activities, and then all the piloting of the transactions that are involved. It has been an immense learning opportunity for developing countries, I have to say, not without its challenges, but also with many successes. In fact, it was really rewarding. Yesterday, it was announced at COP in Belém that Côte d'Ivoire, which is one of the FCPF countries, was the first country to conclude a very large transaction with a third party for carbon credits that are in excess of what we buy from our ERPAs. So this was really the ultimate goal of these products, to really see countries learning how to operate in this sphere. So I think I'm probably out of time, and we'll stop here, but can perhaps continue in the second round. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have time to grill on the questions about all of those amazing developments. So that was our first round, or attempt to try to give you a bit of the glimpse of the big picture of all the things that are really happening on that space. And now we're going to move into the second round to try to zoom in a bit on nature and nature finance more specifically. So we'll go all the way back to Vessi. Vessi, could you tell us a little bit more about how the EBRD is approaching its integration of nature and biodiversity to its operations? And specifically, if you could share a little bit about how the bank supports clients in identifying their climate and nature dependencies, and in developing then credible things such as transition plans and sustainability disclosures that can actually interact with those climate and nature dependencies. Thank you, Vessi.
Thank you, Pedro. A very, very interesting question. I'll try my best to keep it within 5 minutes. So let me just start as you following the formulation of your question more from the policy, the question and the problem that we are having, and then our engagement on a country policy level, sectorial level, and then, as you mentioned, climate governance and transition planning. So for us at EBRD, we see the systemic failure to value nature, really, and that's a pervasive market failure. This is a problem that falls squarely within our transition mandate, and has been an integral part of the bank's operation since its inception. But investing in nature is complex, because unlike, as we mentioned in the previous round of questions, some of the climate ambition and climate actions that are targeting greenhouse gas emissions, those are easy to measure, and they can be also attributed to a corporate level. But for nature and ecosystem health, they depend on many local factors. And for that reason, we, as a bank that is very much focused on the private sector, working with private investor, has been quite of a challenge. For us, what we believe here for nature is that collective action is critical. Partnership is really important. We work together with our partners, with other multilateral development banks on a nature working group, in order to develop regional synergies for ecosystem conservation, recovery through collaboration and partnerships. And we published 4 years ago a joint statement, all the multilateral development banks, on nature, people, and planet, and we work in accordance with. Regional policy initiatives, we have a long-standing experience, more than 20 years, in tackling environmental degradation and supporting ecosystem recovery. So we have some regional projects in the Baltic and Barents Sea. We're working on a recently established Blue Mediterranean partnerships and focusing on blue economy investments. So these are projects that are very much focused on how, investments and sector level pathways that will aim to reduce nature loss, to enhance biodiversity, and really strengthen the local and regional resilience. On sectorial engagements, we have recently started engaging with a couple of countries. Here I can mention we have a nature economy diagnostic in Uzbekistan, and we're looking there at what are the key industries that are most dependent on nature, and how we can develop nature focus sector pathways in order to identify opportunities for investment, in particular in hard-to-abate sectors. At the corporate level, as I mentioned before, we work with our clients to help them move beyond compliance towards strategic climate and nature leadership and identification of solutions that aim at reducing nature loss and biodiversity. Our flagship corporate climate governance facility is now kind of updated in order to integrate nature as well and to help companies in assessing climate and nature related risks, to run scenario analysis, build resilience, and really integrate these nature biodiversity considerations into the investment decisions. Let me give you here an example of a project we did, a pilot project 2023. It's in Ukraine, Astarta, which is a leading agro holding. We did very early days. I think Caio mentioned the CSRD, SRS. We're also very much at the forefront of working with standard setters, promoting international best standards and integrating them in our client advisory work. So in this instance, we worked on double materiality, focusing on nature-related dependencies for these clients, aligning them with, at the time, emerging CSRD, SRS standards before they were slashed 60-70%, but that resulted in very much a product that contributed to and created business value for the clients. So I won't go to detail, but some of the outcome I want to mention is that we developed targets and metrics focused on how the clients could reduce the potential environmental impact and work with local and indigenous communities. We also work now with a similar in agribusiness sector with a client in Turkey and in other countries where we are helping them to develop sustainability linked finance framework that really would help them to reduce carbon intensity, their emissions, but also to look at nature-based solutions and help to enhance the supply chain traceability. If I have a minute, I would only
Let's say you have 30 seconds,
30
as
seconds,
a compromise.
Okay. So what I wanted to mention is that once investments start materializing, once companies start integrating this nature climate consideration decision making, then disclosures and reporting are key. I think already we heard about ISSB, and you have heard that the ISSB will take over some of the work of the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. This is very welcome also for us because that would feed into some of the advisory products for clients to develop not only climate, but very much nature biodiversity transition plans to enhance data comparability and really work also on an industry level, not only individual, not only kind of a local level. So if I can just kind of summarize and say that all these trends that I tried to overcome, very one sentence, Pedro, that I think it's really important in order to have a systemic impact, because we are talking about a very complex issue. Partnerships is key, working at the country platform, policy, legal reform, and also individual capacity building level at companies, and legal reform is important, and it very much goes to enhance I think the reason why we're all here, promoting good governance and legal reform, capacity building in order to make green and nature positive investment possible. Thank you. Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you very much, Vessi. And among the many important points you've made, you probably touched on the biggest challenge to climate finance, which is we have too many acronyms, and that needs to change possibly. Going to something quite different, but just as exciting with Christina. ADB was one of the leading institutions that created the Model Forest Act initiative, or MOFI. I never knew what is the official acronym for it. What key lessons can you share from the Model Forest Act initiative and other nature-positive policy reforms that you helped to design and deploy across Asia and the Pacific?
Thank you, Pedro. And thank you so much for asking about the Model Forest Act Initiative, or MOFI, another acronym. It's really, a great example of partners coming together to safeguard a public good. And it's just not an ADB effort, it's actually a global effort, including with partners such as IFAD and the World Bank. So I think, the theme of systematic transformation, creating scale efficiency, also is sort of like the basis, the rationale behind MOFI. And what's happening right now is that, given the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, all these new challenges, including the transition to the bioeconomy, a lot of the countries are, looking to modernize their really outdated forest laws. In fact, I mean, this is public information, but we are assisting, the government of Fiji in modernizing their forest laws. And a lot of it is basically striking that balance, between addressing the current challenges and really also unlocking nature for development. It's it's sort of the similar themes coming through, but again, it's also, how do countries do this? What is the practical, um, you know, way of balancing these, different types of considerations. So I think, given this huge demand coming down the pike, a lot of us, colleagues here, a lot of different, renowned professors, judges, just everyone in the sphere of this, of the green transition got together, and basically we came out with the Model Forest Act initiative. And the idea is that it's an initiative, basically it's a partnership, but the product is going to be sort of like the production of a general part and a legislative guide, which is sort of like inspired from the commercial realm. And it's designed as a model framework law, basically, giving some benchmarks, some good practices for governments to, draw from. But it is actually more than just a legislative guide. It's actually, it's an attempt to set out a framework law. And I think when we, kind of floated this around, people were just like, you guys are crazy because, forest ecosystems are so diverse globally and even within countries. So they're like, well, how are you going to do this? But, when you really look at, despite the, the different ecosystems, there are common features to both the threats to forests and the applicable norms to forest governance that you could draw out. But clearly, also a lot of forest, laws, national forest laws need to be updated because they were sort of like, enacted when, timber harvesting was like the main focus. But now we have, challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, wildfires. You're hearing a lot about that. And also, there are, modern scientific and technological developments that really can be leveraged to advance forest law beyond the traditional frameworks. And, the most forest laws, they lag behind commitments such as the Paris Agreement, the Global Biodiversity Framework, the new generation of constitutions that recognize a right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, as well as, scientific and technological advancements, which I mentioned before. And, there's a growing recognition that modernizing a country's forest legal framework, it is a critical policy tool to stop deforestation, forest degradation, and enable sustainable management and utilization to meet the demands of the bioeconomy. Because a lot of people are saying, how do we, build without, concrete or very fossil fuel heavy type of materials without, having plantation forests and leveraging forests to steer, towards the basically circular economy. I saw that I have 1 minute left. I mean, there's a lot in the Model Forest Act, and I guess I could just draw out the theme. Basically, it is an ecosystem approach. It's an integrated approach, and that's why it's difficult. It's difficult with nature because it touches so many different, aspects. So the Model Forest Act does basically, what the value add is that everything is sort of like, it brings the fragmented systems together in one place, at least to give the clues. Since we're focusing and there's a lot of other things, but since we're focusing on finance, something new is that we did add a VAR's finance chapter. And there, it does, set out the basic framework for accounting, natural capital accounting, which is still emerging, as well as nature-related disclosure, as well as VAR's finance instruments that need government legislation or regulation. And obviously they're going to be entire separate laws or need regulation to detail them out. And of course, that's where rubber hits the road, is the details. But at least the framework gives the general guidance to the law and policymakers in modernizing their FARS laws. Again, ultimately, the FARS finance mechanisms to be effective, countries need to have the broader policy, legal, institutional, and the data infrastructure to support their credibility, scalability, and sustainability. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christina. Hopefully the Secretariat can share on the chat. I fully recommend all attendees to take a look at the model for a sec. It's really a very interesting piece of work that really helps to connect the dots between finance and generating impacts. With that, we'll go back to Caio and to the relevance of having good research and good insights and creating the right impacts. So the OECD has been exploring how the interest of some investors in the value of nature can translate into more bankable, sustainable projects, which has been quite hard in some situations. Could you share some of the insights that might have emerged from your research, especially into areas such as green bonds and other sustainable kinds of bonds?
Thank you for the question, Pedro. We publish every year now, we publish the Global Debt Report. So last year we had a chapter on sustainable bonds. And by sustainable bonds, we mean green bonds, social bonds, and sustainability, and also sustainability-linked bonds. So I can go into some of the most important details here. And next week, actually on Monday, we will launch a standalone report on sustainable bonds, but now with policy recommendations. So actually, this intervention here will be kind of a spoiler. I will share some of these policy considerations to try to nudge you to download the report next week. So, I mean, in terms of the size of the markets, it's really impressive. I mean, sustainable bonds will never be a silver bullet for our problems, but I think that they can be one of the instruments to help in the transition and the protection of biodiversity. So nowadays we have a bit more over $2 trillion of outstanding sustainable bonds by the corporate sector, and a similar amount of sustainable bonds issued by the official sector, by governments, multilateral institutions. And this more or less represents 10% of the outstanding bonds in the corporate sector, a bit more for non-financial companies, a bit less for financial companies. And in the case of multilateral institutions, about 35% of the bonds issued by multilateral institutions are sustainable. So, I mean, it's a quite important size, and comparing to 5 years ago, which was almost nothing. I mean, we now have like a real market. So we are coming with some policy recommendations to try to help to both to increase the impact of the issuance of those bonds, but also the efficiency of the market as a whole. So, I mean, the first one, it's really, as was mentioned before, for entity level disclosure, we also need standards that make the information about those bonds comparable. And basically, there are two benchmarks in the issuance of sustainable bonds. One of them is the standard itself, and the most often used one is the ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association principles. And we also need, in the case of the use of proceeds bonds, we also need a taxonomy to assess whether the project where the proceeds will be invested in is sustainable or not. And I mentioned that ICMA is the most important standard, but the most important taxonomy has been the CBI, and also in China, they have their own taxonomy there. But this issue is a bit concerning, I would say, because almost all countries now, they want to develop their own taxonomy. And some of them are quite similar, but this is an issue. I mean, I think that we should avoid, to the extent possible, the issuance, the creation of new taxonomies, because otherwise, the cross-border investments will become very difficult. So this is one of the first policy recommendations. The other one, which is more straightforward to understand and agree perhaps, is that the metrics that the issuer would need to provide, ideally there would be metrics that are similar to what we have in the IFRS S1, S2, or in other standards. For example, the disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, they should just follow the widely accepted standards. And a third point that it perhaps is a bit more technical, we will need more time to discuss in detail, but I mean, to my surprise and to our surprise, we really looked into 200 prospectus of bond issuance, which is a huge work to do. They can be quite long. But I mean, one of the things that we found is that actually in 3/4 of the issuances, the issuer is allowed to refinancing an existing project. So actually the proceeds do not go into a new project. They just go to, in theory, kind of finance the issuer to keep an asset that already exists. So this just, I mean, may tell you that the so-called additionality in the issuance of sustainable bonds perhaps does not really exist, at least in 3/4 of the issuance. So this is an issue. And then if you go to some of the standards, they usually request disclosure about the refinancing. But if you go to the prospectus, no issuer really disclose how much you go into refinancing or finance of a new project. So this is a really big issue. So in the fourth point here is that in those issuance, we have the so-called second party opinion provider, which is nothing else than an assurance provider that is checking whether the bonds documents, the legal documents, are in line with a set of standards or not. And as you may imagine, this is a very similar situation to what we have for credit rating agencies or external auditors. But in this case, we don't have any regulation. So although the conflicts of interest that we see and we deal with in the case of credit rating agencies, there is no kind of regulation or market monitoring in relation to those issues related to second party opinion provider, which is also an important issue. And just to finalize, and I mentioned in the beginning, the sustainability linked bonds. They are a bit different from the typical green bonds that we know, because in that case, the issuer has a target to reach kind of ESG performance. So for example, what the most typical one is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if the issuer does not reach that target, they need typically to pay a penalty. But there are, of course, as you can also perhaps easily agree, is that if these targets are not ambitious enough, they will make no difference. I mean, the sustainability linked bond would just be a normal bond because they are not really changing the incentives for the issuer. And also the penalty needs to be relevant. And typically the penalty is 50 basis points, which is not much either, considering the prevailing market rates not too long ago. So what we recommend here is that the stewardship codes, they should perhaps in some cases, they don't usually say much about creditors, but bondholders. But when they say something, I think that there should be some consideration in relation to the role of the institutional investor when reviewing the legal documentation to check whether the sustainability related targets are ambitious or not ambitious, for example.
Thank you very much, Caio. Caio very kindly sharing some of the inside scoops to the participants of the Climate Law and Governance Day. Hopefully that also incentivizes you to tune into the other sections to get more inside scoops as well. And also managed to touch on some of the questions that were popping up in real time at the Q&A, even if he probably doesn't realize it, but he was answering some of them as well. Changing to Phoebe and to try to bring the stakeholder perspective a bit or discussion today. How can we build, in your experience, inclusive investment environments that are strengthening the resilience of all stakeholders, especially thinking about more potentially vulnerable groups like women, like the youth, or like indigenous peoples as well?
Thanks, Pedro. So many panels today have highlighted the importance of fair and inclusive transitions. This is super important. In this panel, Vessi mentioned people, nature, and planet. And Christina mentioned MoFi, which draws on this too, because people, nature, and planet, they intersect, they work together. And the Belém Declaration from this year's COP calls for human-centered climate responses. This recognizes the unequal impacts of climate change, including in our financial system. Its emphasis on climate finance for social protection and for small-scale agriculture is crucial. It's also kind of the first time this connectivity is coming into play. So building investment enabling environments that really strengthen resilience require placing social inclusion at the core of economic design. Resilience is not only about infrastructure or money, it is about participation, it's about equity and communities' ability to adapt. So rural people are among those most affected by the intersecting crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and food insecurity. Within these communities, women, youth, and Indigenous peoples often face particular constraints. What are these constraints? Well, there's limited access to land, credit, and market, as well as barriers to participation in decision-making. People need a seat around the table. These groups are vital in healthy nature, planet, and people systems. They have vital knowledge, and their innovation is critical to sustainable development. For example, focusing on gender, which is one of my areas of speciality, gender equality has incredible economic benefits globally. It is estimated that closing the gender gap could give the global economy a USD 7 trillion boost. Further, a lot of the studies out there just show that if women had equal access to education, employment, and income opportunities, more than half of the existing food security gap could be closed. That's phenomenal. So why are we not closing this gap on gender and other inclusion points? Inequality is really persistent. Research is showing that gender equality is going to take at least 123 years to resolve. None of us are going to be here by the time we see gender equality. And crises like the climate crisis is just worsening this gap. So it's really essential, both economic and social reasons, that we prioritize inclusive investment. It's good for everyone. This means embedding gender-responsive budgeting, supporting youth entrepreneurship, and ensuring that Indigenous peoples' rights and knowledge systems inform project design. In practice, what this means is inclusive finance is both a fairness issue and an efficiency issue. When investment has breadth and depth, then resilience becomes systemic rather than selective. So to break up the monotony of me going on about this, as I'm very passionate about this topic, as I have a moment longer, and I promised optimism today, I want to explain how this can work in practice to make it more tangible. I'm going to highlight an example of IFAD's work, which really entrenches climate justice within it. Persistent droughts linked to climate change have reduced Senegal's mangrove forests by almost 40% recently. This has accelerated coastal erosion, threatening villages and the region's food supply. It's both a risk of communities being washed away, food being washed away, and culture being washed away. Our project, which focuses on the Senegal Schilling Delta, has implemented a nature-based solution that not only bolsters climate and food resiliency using mangrove restoration, but it creates new opportunities for women, such as Marianne. So Marianne, one of our clients in Senegal, she now makes a living from raising and selling oysters that grow in mangrove restored areas. IFAD-funded project provided her with skills and investment needed to become an entrepreneur in a high-value product. This is essential. 80% of the world's poorest people live in rural areas. These are our clients, the rural poor, who, like Marianne, are at the front lines of the climate crisis. We know that the climate crisis is driving food insecurity, and people like Marianne are bearing the heaviest burdens, compounded by discrimination, scarce resources, and limited access to finance. We need to change this. We need to challenge this. But we should take confidence from the fact that real progress is possible when inclusion, justice, and human dignity shape the way we design climate and development solutions. As my parting words, I want to draw on Jane Goodall, who reminded us that you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. I think really highlighting very relevant point about the links between different developmental challenges and how we need to think about them in an integrated manner. Going back to Fabiano, who I see already lost the headphones preemptively. Fabiano already mentioned the CCDRs, the Country Climate and Development Reports, as crucial to get the assessment right. I think my second question to you is very related to that. Looking ahead, what policy and regulatory measures do you see as the most critical to try to better integrate nature and biodiversity considerations into investment and economic planning frameworks? It feels like we really throw some big questions to you. So again, Fabiano, floor is all yours.
Thanks, Pedro, and I hope you can hear me now. Perfect. So thanks for the question. I will keep to my previous topic of carbon markets, and in this sphere, I'll really highlight the role and the importance of comprehensive carbon market legislation, in particular, but not only with regards to nature-based carbon credits. We really see, and I will speak a bit concretely from the experience that we had in implementing these carbon trust funds that I mentioned before, how comprehensive legislation is key for ensuring high integrity generation of carbon credits, but also for the integrity of the market in itself and its transactions. Because lack of legislation causes not only uncertainty and lack of legal security for market players, but actually might in fact prevent countries from accessing opportunities for carbon finance. So we really see, as I mentioned, in the implementation of these emission reduction purchase agreements that we sign with countries, a few areas that are really bottlenecks in this broader sphere. And the first of it, in general, I think when the bank started to implement these carbon trust funds, which was over 10 years ago, very few countries had legislation on carbon markets, and to this day, this is still, I think, a learning by doing experience across the board. So I think the first area that I would mention is really carbon ownership and transferability. So really what we could call carbon credits, carbon rights. And this is really key because in relation to nature-based solutions, for instance, there's a huge intersection with land and natural resources rights. So in order both to respect these rights, but really to ensure the integrity of the carbon credit and the transferability of it, it is really super important to have a clear definition of to whom carbon credits belong and how they can be transferred. And this sometimes is easier when you have certain sectors in which it may be more obvious, and perhaps on a project setting sphere, which is simpler, so to say. But when you go, for instance, to a large jurisdictional RED+ program, things start to become a bit more complicated, because not only you need to be able to define clearly to whom the carbon credits belong to and how this intersection with natural resources rights, and in particular land, takes place. The fact that these credits might be transacted in a centralized way adds additional challenges to the mix. And I think it was Phoebe who mentioned, the importance of land tenure and land rights. It's a bit of a counter effect to the increase of the market for carbon credits in nature-based solutions, an additional pressure on land and by consequence on land rights, which really, emphasizes the importance of getting this right. A second point is really the key role of designing and implementing comprehensive benefit sharing schemes, so as to reward and to make sure that the benefits, not just the financial benefits, but also perhaps non-financial benefits that might arise from carbon markets, really flow to those that actually undertake the work to transition to more sustainability practices, because what we really want is through these instruments to shift the mindset, right? Not just of the decision maker, but actually of those that are working the land, are working the farm, are taking care of the forest. It's obviously a great idea, not so easy to implement in practice. It requires comprehensive consultation processes and adequate financial frameworks so the finance can really flow securely to beneficiaries. A third point on the integrity management rules, for the carbon credits, including monitoring, reporting, and verification, as well as buffer reserves, so as to really make sure that there is a permanence for the carbon credits generated. And, as you mentioned, biodiversity, there is increasingly a push to integrate biodiversity considerations as a premium for carbon credits, and rules are starting to emerge to allow for that. And last but not least, I would mention transactional rules related to carbon credits, such as the authorization and the corresponding adjustments that might be required when these credits are transacted between countries. And I'll wrap up. But this is critical to ensure the additionality and to avoid double counting, which is really key for the environmental integrity of the market. These are issues that, as I mentioned before, will be key parts of the carbon markets legal and reforms toolkit that the bank will hope to launch early 2026. So stay tuned. Thanks, and over.
Thank you so much, Fabiano. We have very limited time to questions and for closing remarks. So we were very lucky to get a very good question from Professor Marcus Gehring, which I think gives all the panelists a chance to give their closing remarks. So Professor Marcus Gehring asked, how important is the capacity of government lawyers in the green transition? But I would suggest final remarks reflecting on what can lawyers, many of which are attending this session, be it law students, law practitioners, academics, and so on and so forth, how can them help to advance some of the issues you have been discussing? We'll have 2 minutes each, strictly controlled, and maybe we can start with Vessi once again.
Thank you, Pedro. And fascinating panel. I just would like to use the privilege of being the first one to make the concluding remarks. Just a plethora of expertise on this panel. So fantastic. I hope we continue this discussion. Professor Gehring, thank you for your question. Indeed, as you know very, very well, that building the capacity at national governments is key. And that applies, of course, to lawyers, starting, I would say, more junior, mid-level, but also more senior lawyers and government officials. I think what is quite important is also to help create synergies between, it's not my favorite word, but really close partnership and collaboration between lawyers and experts from other disciplines. And that still, I feel there are silos, and that shouldn't be, because to solve complex problems, we really need complex solutions. We need contributions from experts from various disciplines. So that's in terms of expertise and background, but also I think what we have seen on an institutional level, as I mentioned, overlapping mandates, unclear responsibilities for at institutional level, as well as, I would say, again, lack of coordination, which is quite important for large investors or for multilateral development bank, that the national government speaks the same language and they're, as Christina mentioned, properly supported. And one of our main roles in our team is as well help to build capacity and to help to enable them to sit on the table and discuss with investors and with other governments how to support their country in this low carbon, resilient, sustainable, and more importantly, also just transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes on the dots. Off to Christina. Any closing remarks, either engaging or not engaging with Professor Marcus's question?
I mean, yeah, I echo everything Vessi said. I think for, those of you tuning in who are at the start of this, in this space, experts, as you can see, there's just so much. And it's a very exciting field, very complex field. So I urge, a lot of you out there that are especially like the younger lawyers, professionals, or even and still in law school to explore this field, because it is very interesting in terms of the complexity of the issues, but it has real world implications. And I think, lawyers in general, we have a broad overview, and often it's the lawyers that kind of like brings things together, connects the dots, and puts it in a, coherent, comprehensive framework, like, Fabiano had said. And we're really at the forefront of, developing, enabling that high integrity and credible environmental markets. But in particular, with respect to government lawyers, as you can imagine, they're sort of like the in-house counsel of like the entire government. So they have like so much happening, and they really need, this is a specialized area. So they really need us to help with, providing them the knowledge, the resources, and helpful toolkits, like, what Fabiano's is developing, the standards that OECD has, just a lot of the knowledge work that we're working together on. And in this, I guess, sphere, it is critical that, MDBs, IFI lawyers, people in this space do, work together, because it's so complex and it's so monumental. So, fragmented action is not going to get us there. So I urge everyone to work together, and we invite all of you to, reach out to us and partner. And finally, I invite you to explore ADB's Asia Pacific Climate Report, which was just released last month. It's called Unlocking Nature for Development, and it offers a 10-year roadmap for all countries at all stages of development. So check it out on ADB's website. Many thanks.
Thank you so much. The attendees have a very nice reading list by this stage. Without any further ado, off to Caio to give his closing remarks.
No, thank you very much. Just to answer to the question, not to repeat what Vessi and Christina just mentioned, which I agree with. Because I think that's in terms of like private enforcement, like the derivative lawsuits, etc. It's a bit hard to have it in an active way in relation to sustainability disclosure or some of the other issues, because you need to prove the financial loss, and it can be complicated in most cases, I would say. So I see a special role for the public enforcement by security regulators and others, but perhaps not at this stage, because if we could have another session, another panel just on greenwashing, sustainability washing, and I think that for you to prove and to sanction any director or executive because of any kind of misinformation in relation to sustainability, you would also need, of course, to have some evidence that it would have been possible to have a better system, so on and so forth, which might not be the case in many jurisdictions for many companies. We are all learning on how to implement IFRS S1 and 2, European sustainability reporting standards, etc. So it's not really a moment, I would say, that to be so harsh in terms of public enforcement. But this is, hopefully in 5 or 10 years, where things more well established, this will come. The moment will come, but perhaps not now.
Thank you very much, Caio. Phoebe, any final remarks?
Sure, I'll be really speedy. So high temperatures, extreme weather events, they're going to keep disrupting our food systems, undermining human rights like food security and right to nutrition around the world. So addressing these challenges, it really demands more than technical fixes. It requires us lawyers across finance, policy, and program design to place the environment, people, equity, and inclusion at the center. Lawyers play a crucial role. The Senegal project I mentioned, lawyers were all over it. It wasn't a one-off project. We do so many of these, and it's part of a broader portfolio of actions where we're really putting nature, people, and planet at the center. We don't just help with the negotiation of documents. We do so much more. We really, in my work, we push to support smallholders, we promote gender equality, and we really drive climate resilient development. We ensure that the investment in development advances social justice and climate justice. Equally important here is legal collaboration. Christina mentioned this, partnerships like those between the ADB and IFAD, like on the Middle Forest Act. They demonstrate how joining expertise across institutions is multiplying impact. This is so important. These are legal collaborations as well. That's why they're so brilliant. We are ensuring that not only we have the finance in place for sustainable development, but the infrastructure and the institutions to sustain it. We're now, 5 years away.
Try to wrap up. We have a very ominous timer counting down, and we have a very nice round of GCs starting very soon as well.
Sounds good. Okay, so just to wrap up by once again returning to Jane Goodall, it's up to us lawyers to decide what kind of difference we want to make. So over to you.
Lovely. Party words, Fabiano, before we join GCs from amazing international financial institutions.
Thank you, Pedro. And I just really echo what all the panelists have said. Perhaps two parting points from me. I think there is, a really momentum for stock taking and exploring lessons learned. All these mechanisms and initiatives that have been mentioned today, innovative, in the case of carbon markets, so much has been trialed, many challenges. And I think we're now entering a new phase with Article 6 and the broadening of the engagement of actors. But it's important to emphasize that these challenges are not failures, but are a key part of the process, and we can learn from them, and not to dismiss the instruments, because there was this learning curve, I think, for everyone involved, not just the countries and the government lawyers involved, but also for our own institutions. And then last but not least, really to just re-emphasize what has been mentioned, that the great need for capacity development and technical assistance for countries, for government lawyers. And I think all of us here in this panel today can play a very important role, but not only in isolation, but I always like to emphasize this, how important it is that we create collaborations, networks, that we create spaces for those working in this field to exchange experiences and to work together. I really hope that this panel and this conversation today can go on beyond this day of the COP. Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and I hope all attendees enjoyed this as much as I have, and have as many, as much of a desire to jump into all of those initiatives as I have. Have another great session, great sessions starting soon. So thank you all very much for your time, and you'll see you in the other events of the Climate Law and Governance Day. Thank you all.